History of Korean War: why North Korea and South Korea are separated. A nation's division is not just a line on its geographical map, it carves through the hearts of its people. Those who were united for centuries stand separated, forced to acknowledge the political division over the bond of relations, language, and culture. A very brief history. The Korean peninsula was a united territory under the Josean dynasty that ruled over the region for more than 500 years, starting from 1392 after the fall of the Gorveo dynasty. This rule came to an end in 1910 with the Japanese annexation of Korea. As Japan's colony, Korea was under a cruel Japanese rule for 35 years, 1910 to 1945, a time when Koreans struggled to preserve their culture. After Japan's defeat in World War II, Koreans aspired to be a free nation but were little aware of what they were going to suffer next. The Korean War begins. When Korea was liberated from Japanese control at the end of the Second World War, the United States and the Soviet Union agreed temporarily to divide Korea at the 38th parallel of latitude north of the equator. This division resulted in the formation of two countries, Communist North Korea, supported by USSR, and South Korea, supported by USA. 5 years after the country's partition, the communist leader of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, decided to attempt to reunify Korea under his control. On June 25, 1950, Kim launched a surprise invasion of South Korea. Believing that the Soviet Union had backed the invasion, United States President Harry Truman and his advisors followed through on their policy of containment, refusing to allow communism to spread anywhere in the world. Within 2 days of the invasion, the United States had rallied the United Nations Security Council to declare support for South Korea. An American-led UN coalition deployed to South Korea. By August, North Korean forces had swept across almost all of South Korea. In September, the United States launched a bold counteroffensive that included a daring amphibious landing in territory held by North Korean forces at Incheon, on South Korea's western coast. Soon, US forces drove the North Koreans back to the border at the 38th parallel. Beyond the 38th parallel. In late November 1950, as American forces neared the Chinese border, leaders in Communist China sent tens of thousands of Chinese soldiers streaming into North Korea and drove the American and UN forces southward, back across the 38th parallel. By spring 1951, the Americans had pushed to the 38th parallel once again. The next 2 years saw periods of fierce fighting, but the border held. In 1953, an armistice established a status quo antebellum border near the border that had originally divided North and South Korea. The heavily armed 2.5-mile wide DMZ, demilitarized zone, separating North and South Korea exists to this day. About 36,500 American soldiers died in the war, as well as hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians from North Korea, South Korea, and coalition forces. Ongoing conflict. Though both leaders believed in the reunification of Korea, their ideologies were not only different but also opposing. A year later, as a part of a UN agreement, both the US and Soviets were to withdraw their armies from the peninsula. Though it did happen, there was still a large presence in the form of advisors and diplomats from both the superpowers. The bottom line. Neither the planned moves by the superpowers nor the devastating Korean War could reunite Korea. Today, North Korea and South Korea are not only separated politically and geographically, but almost 7 decades of separation has turned them into different worlds. South Korea is among the trillion-dollar economies while North's population still survives on aid. The two nations have different citizens' rights, laws and order, economies, societies, and daily life. But the history of thousands of years of Korea as a unified nation will always be a reminder of its arbitrary division. Thank you.